Holy, it is hot out. Actually feels good to come in here and escape the heat for a little bit, working out there. Trying to reclaim some lumber up the side of an old shack on the other side of the property. I'm gonna use it on one wall in one of the bedrooms to look pretty cool, but I think I used galvanized ring nails and they're starting to split everything I pry on. It's a little frustrating. So I decided it's time to take a break from the heat, come inside, sit down with a polar bear and feel if I can feel any chill coming off that. Probably not. But anyway, but I come in and hang out with a polar bear for a bit and share some emails that I have that I found that weren't shared from a while back, even more, and get through those, help some people out. And then gotta get back at it and hit the logging road. Oh, and a side note, I was talking to my neighbor and his kids were curious about my channel, so I started telling them exactly what the channel was about, how I came there, and I told about my story, my grandfather's story, and sure enough, one of his employees and his buddy were driving along the Banfield Road in what most people consider 11-mile hill. We used to call it Internet Hill because it's the last place we get service. And they saw a huge hair-covered man-like thing come straight off the steep frickin' bluffs on the left. If you guys know or familiar with that is, jumped onto the road and basically leapt right over the edge in front of their pickup truck and down, which we all know is steep as hell. Bluffs and timber straight down on the water side. There you go. When you open up and talk, look people square in the eye, talk to them, you hear multiple experiences come back no matter where you are, it seems to me. Try it sometime. It's every time I turn around, you talk to somebody new who's got another story, right? Okay, what do we got here? I'm a truck driver, drove for a living. I live in California. And this one particular night, it must have been around 2 a.m. in the morning. I was driving on a real dangerous road full of curves in the middle of nowhere. All of a sudden I came up on this small herd of deer standing in the middle of the road. I must have been going around 50 miles per hour. I hit the brakes and managed to slow down to about 35 miles per hour, but I couldn't avoid hitting some of the deer. I pulled over to see how badly they were hurt. It's sad that I killed one, but oddly the rest were just standing around. Not wanting to run away, even though I nearly killed all of them, I tried getting them off the road so nobody else would run them over. But they would not move off the road. They just stood there staring into the darkness to the left side of the road. It was strange, their behavior. I honking my horn, but they would not budge. So I started my truck. I just put it in gear, started to drive away when movement caught my attention from the corner of my eyes. This huge, hairy thing, which I first thought was a bear, but it was not. It was like the biggest damn hairy ape-like thing I'd ever seen. It got close to my truck passenger door. I could clearly see his face, human-like, but huge. It scared the crap out of me. Let me repeat that part. Human-like, all right? Scared the crap out of me. He must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. I believe this is what the deer were running away from. Always heard stories, but never seen one till that night. Feel free to share this. I'm now a firm believer in these creatures. And welcome to the club of no return, my man. Well, thanks for sharing that, and I'll guarantee you none of that deer meat was wasted. I will guarantee you that human-like being scooped him up and grabbed him, took him back to his friends and family or whatever, right? Crazy exciting. I've heard of a few similar experiences to that one. Thanks for sending that in. Greetings, Steve from Ohio. How can I tell you how good it is to have access to a site like yours? I hope you know how much you are needed and how important your work is to a big group of people and growing larger every day. Let's get right into it, shall we? My dad took me hunting and fishing from an early age, but not only did he teach me to hunt and shoot, but he taught me to be a woodsman. I love to be in the woods. My whole life was built around hunting and fishing. The job I had, which was allowed me to work long hours in the warmer months and take a layoff around October till mid-March or April. To the woman I married, she was from Tennessee and understood how I chose to live my life. I need to tell you all of this to give you an idea of the time I spent in the woods. I hunted 2 states without exception for 25 straight years. Then, when all the different seasons were over and all the tags were filled, then I would steelhead fish or ice fish. My sighting came in the month of October 1992. My dad and I were coming back from my grandma's place in West Virginia. It's 1:30 a.m. on Route 21 in Ohio between Canal, Fulton, and Massillon. It's a stretch of road that runs very close to Tuscarawas, pronounced Tuscarawas River. Side note, this is very close to Minerva, Ohio. Just Google Minerva Monster. My dad and I came around a bend in the road, and the truck headlights lit up this thing on the side of the road. I was driving, so I probably seen it about a half a second before my dad did. And I only seen it for a couple seconds. Then we were past it. But I can tell you that those few moments are burned into my brain. There were at least two creatures. One of them was much smaller than the other. The smaller of the two looked to be trying to drag a dead deer back towards the wood line. But the one that stood out to me was the big creature. I don't know why I would know this, but I am almost positive the big one was pissed that the small creature had caused him to be caught out in the open. It looked to be hovering over the small one, sort of hunched. As my truck headlights swept over them, it stood all the way up, and it and I locked eyes. I'm not going to sit here and say that I received some kind of mind speaker subliminal message. I just know that I got the impression that we caught this creature with his pants down, so to speak. The feeling I got was, don't think about stopping or turning around, it will not end well for you. It was pretty comical as I looked back on that night, because my dad and I drove for probably 3 or 4 minutes in total silence. Then almost at the same time, we both looked at each other and said, what in God's name was that? My dad has been a strict Baptist for most of his life. He is an old school to the max. My dad later says to me, that was a wild boar. I said, Dad, what in universe is there a boar as big as that thing we just seen? Forget the fact that we're in frickin' Ohio, an hour from Cleveland. I truly believe that my dad's mind will not allow him to come to terms with what it was that we actually witnessed that night on the side of that deserted highway. He won't even talk about it still to this day. I've spent many, many hours in the woods before that night, and yet my one and only sighting was on the side of a 4-lane highway pretty close to a major city. I know my sighting is not that glamorous or exciting, but I think it is so strange how two people can see the same thing and come away with two very different conclusions. Thanks again, Steve. You're living the life most of us mortals only dream of living. Scott Crouch. Scott, thanks for that, man. And I'm pretty sure it might be apparent by now that your dad just did not want to acknowledge that he's seen that thing and didn't want his life turned upside down by acknowledging and accepting that there's a lot more going out there than we are presently raised to believe, right? But anyway, thanks for sending that in, man. I know what you saw, you know what you saw, and thousands of other people know what you saw too. Let's get on sharing some more while I'm hiding in the shop before I get discovered and gotta get back to work. Ran across your channel and have been a fan ever since. As one who grew up in the woods and went to town versus one who lived in town and went to the woods, I can identify when someone has experience and knowledge. You frequently pause to check your surroundings. It's a smart thing to do. And for experienced individuals, it's a normal action. My biggest concern is cougars. Attached to the pic, feel free to share it if so desire. I'm 4 in the pic, the small one in the middle with the attitude. My father was a lumberjack. Wherever he was working, we lived in a tent close by. The pic was taken in 1966 when my grandfather and grandmother drove up to visit us. The station wagon in the pic is theirs. We were living in the mountains above Tamarack, Idaho. Yes, that tent in the picture was home. The floor was of mattresses with a Coleman camp stove on top of the cooler. The milk cans in the back held water from the creek, which ran down the stream to the left, just on the other side of the tent. It was a feeder creek, which led into a slightly larger creek. If you walked off to the left and about 30 yards on the other side of the creek, there was a cliff. Where you looked down, you could see a clearing and the larger stream flowing to the left, downhill. As kids, we played in the creek and on the milk cans. Occasionally, we would tip over a milk can and Dad would blister our backsides because that meant that he had to refill it. We were never allowed to play on the other side of the creek. If you have spent any time with long-time loggers, you know they know. Even the loggers for Weyerhaeuser will pause and mention to each other, do you see that one looking at us? They never mention them away from the hill they are logging. If they do, they will get fired. Weyerhaeuser does not need the attention. As I mentioned, Dad was working a section in Tamarack, Idaho. One night he woke me up and my 2 older brothers. The night was clear with a bright moon. It was almost like daylight. It was almost like daylight. He told us to be quiet and walk with him. He took us across the creek and we looked down over the edge. Dad whispered, do you see them? We looked down and my brother said, 3 bears. I also thought we were looking at 3 bears. My dad said, "No, be quiet, look closer." We watched. It was about 50 yards down to the clearing. There was 1 large bear and 2 smaller bears, but the smaller bears were large for bear cubs. We watched them walk around on 2 legs, and my brother asked, "What are they?" My dad said, "Sasquatch, be quiet, let's leave." Ever since that night, I wondered how they knew they were there. Ever since that night, I wondered how he knew they were there. During an elk hunting trip when I was 27, I finally asked him how he knew. I loved the honesty. Dad simply said, "I walked over there to take a leak and spotted them. At first, I also thought they were bears." Needless to say, since that day, I've had multiple experiences with them. No need to fill up an email with them all. I've learned to simply not talk about them. It's easier. I have 2 boys. When they were 28 and 31, they asked me how I developed the unnatural skill of spotting animals that no one else does until I pointed them out. Well, it is because I've had a lot of years logged in the wilderness. I even told them the story when I was 10. My dad took me up to the wilderness boundary and instructed me to walk to the top of the second ridge, head west for 500 yards and drive any elk back to him. Armed with a lever action 30-30 Winchester, I took off and did what I was instructed. As you know, the lever action 30-30 has a reputation of kicking like a Missouri mule, and they do. By the time I was 10, I shot it many times and was very proficient with it. I didn't think anything about my dad's instructions to go 2 or 3 ridges and come back. He had me do that stuff all the time. I recall when Grandma heard what he did, she just about killed my dad. Of course, my kids had to ask their grandma to see if the story was true, and it was. As a father with boys, I can only imagine doing that to my kids, and I'm really surprised my grandmother didn't kill my father. But now, the really tough question. While you're fishing throughout Vancouver Island, why don't we see any fish in your hands? Do you need a howtofish.com channel? Sarcasm. Really, Steve, you're doing a great job. Keeping an open and inviting environment for people to share differentiates your channel. Honest, no BS, keep up the good work. Cinema photography is awesome. And yes, you're using yourself as bait. Paul. On the UFO subject, I have a friend who has a video of one that is only 50 feet over his house. Very clear, very real, 30 minutes long, very detailed, recorded on tape, not digital. He will not share because of the ridicule he will receive. Hey man, thanks for that email. I'm just going to save this photo to my phone album so I can put it in the video. Those old school tents, I remember those tents. That's quite the share, man. That's quite the experience. Thank you so much for sharing that with the people through me. And the fish, why the no fish with me? You know, I probably spend more time trying to film them underwater than catching them. Last winter, I think you're probably talking about steelhead fishing, right? But last winter was the first time I went and did a Vancouver Island tour of all the rivers I used to fish, and talking to all the fishermen, it was a pretty sad, depressing tale of how our fisheries were managed over here in the state of our steelhead. I spoke to one guy who recalled being back in the heyday when you could get 15, 20 steelhead in a day, 20 years ago, and he said he got 2 the whole season last season. That was in one of the best steelhead rivers I used to fish. But I did manage to get a few steelhead, and I filmed, I think, maybe a dozen with my underwater camera system. But anyway, thanks again for sharing that, man, and your friends with the UFO video. Tell them to quit being scared. That's the key to the success of the people, is not being scared of each other anymore. That's what we're trying to push here. Don't be scared of each other, all right? Stop it. There's nothing to be scared of. This is life. Every single flavor of life we deserve to hear about, know about, and experience, right? Whether it be good or bad, we need to know the honest truth about it. So if your friend wants to share that video through me or through you or through somebody, encourage them to do it. Encourage them to not be scared of people anymore. Maybe even forward this video to them after you see it, all right? Thanks for sending that in again, man. Texas Hill Country Encounter. Morning, Steve. I just found your site 2 weeks ago and I'm still catching up. The raw honesty here gives me some hope for human beings and perhaps for other beings as well. I have a story to tell that I've never shared with anyone. Family, friends, wives, anyone. But first, a question. You encourage others to let down their guards and share the truths, yet you are holding back many things that you know. Secrets that you hint at but do not share. The nuclear connection, the government's hidden knowledge, and the agenda for these beings. They're more than human abilities or history. Are you protecting your vulnerable platform, or are there other reasons? I'm curious. All right, before I carry on with the email, dude. That's a pretty bold thing to say what I am doing without ever speaking to me in person or knowing exactly what's going on, right? Just assuming that I am holding back many things that you know, that I know. Secrets that you hint about and do not share. I don't hint about much. I do mention things for everybody to look into themselves and angles to come and look at things from a different angle, different perspective. And I do know things from people who are very intelligent who have asked me not to share publicly due to their professional career at stake. All right? I am quite confident when the right time comes, these same people will give me the full green light to share with you what they shared with me. All right? But other than that, if I know something, I share it here. If I know something without a doubt, I share it here. I'm not scared of shit, obviously. But I do respect everyone, and no matter what they share with me, if they shared with me a video of one bleeding out and spitting out his last breath from 2 feet away and they asked me not to share it publicly, I wouldn't share it publicly. That's how you acquire respect and a good name, right? You gotta be true to your friends, true to your neighbors, and respect people's requests. Don't go behind their backs and screw them. All right? So, other than that, there's nothing seriously major that I'm keeping from you guys intentionally to save this channel or something. It's not the case. Okay, man? Hope that clears something up. And for all you people who think I should speak anyway, because even though they asked me not to, well, you got it wrong. I will respect everyone first and foremost, no matter what. My story: I grew up in a very large ranch and hill country of central Texas, over 37 square miles of pristine juniper and scrub oak savanna. Lots of limestone hills cut through with brush-filled draws and hollows, hidden springs. I've never heard a story here about mysterious sightings or secretive beings living in the bush. In the 1970s, I spent many nights camping alone, seeking out the beautiful hidden places that no man had set foot on since Archeac hunters and gatherers traveled these ridges between the rivers. The land has changed, springs have come and gone, but the soul of some of these places can still be felt in powerful ways. It was those places I sought. Several times I revisited a particular deep draw that was all but hidden by brush and scrub. It held the bones of a long dried up spring. There were middens nearby that showed the artifacts of occupation that may have continued seasonally for 1,000 years. At the head of the draw, being the spring, the limestone was weathered into a small curved amphitheater, a magical place. I would go there and play my flute into that natural chamber. My lack of talent seemed consequential. One fall day in 1972, I was there playing my flute just before dark. It felt different. Something was there with me. I wasn't afraid, since there was nothing out there more dangerous than rattlesnakes, and you simply had to watch out for. Bears were hunted out 100 years ago. The mountain lions are far too secretive, but something was tickling my senses hard. I thought that maybe I'd awakened some entity of the spring. Carlos Castaneda was all the rage back then. I looked up, and on the side of the hill, not 40 feet away, there was a face peeking around from behind a juniper. It was much larger than me, and I'm 6 foot tall. I could only see part of its face, shoulder, arm, and part of the one leg. Lightly furred on the lower arm and leg, but thickly muscled. Its face was mostly smooth, and its eyes were bright golden brown. It ducked back behind the tree and then slowly peeked out around it again. I was stunned, paralyzed, but not in fear. We both held still for what seemed like a long time. I'm not sure what passed between us, but something. It disappeared again. I heard a bird-like chirp, and the next thing I saw was the movement of it passing over the side of the draw, maybe 75 feet away. I've never told anyone about that encounter for the sure knowledge of the ridicule I would receive. I've returned to that spot many times and have never seen another being. I've also often wondered if it was the sound of the flute that attracted it, but the intelligence in its eyes was unmistakable. Thanks for hearing my story, and a bigger thanks for offering a place for others to share experiences that have been guarded for so long. I'm a fan of honesty, and I appreciate yours. Keep going and share more of your own. Cheers, Tom Penn. Thanks, Tom, and welcome to the Club of No Return, my man. Welcome to the Club of No Return. It's endless, isn't it? It's endless, endless. The descriptions are all very, very similar. The intelligent look in his eyes, human look, man-like, human-like, man-like, It was not a gorilla, it was not an ape, it was a big, large man. Too bad I don't have the time. I'd like to go back over all the encounters and count up just what the ratio is to how many people said it looked like a gorilla compared to how many people said it looked more human. I think I'd be willing to bet right now that 99.99% of these experiences are all, quote, it was a man/human-like being, right? And then you think about how many people just want and need you to believe it's a monkey or a gorilla, a wood ape. Holy shit, really? Really? So you decide this thing was a monkey or a gorilla, and that's all there is to it. And meanwhile, you're gonna have 10,000 people tell you it was a human-like being. What do? I'd be curious what people do when they hear that. They shut their ears, pretend they didn't hear it, pretend they didn't read it. Dumbasses. Mountain Island Lake and Bolivia, North Carolina. Hello, this is Margie Morrison. I'm a 60-year-old grandmother from North Carolina. I've been around the Sasquatch in 2 places. The first when I was a young girl living near Mountain Island Lake, then called Shuffletown, outside of Charlotte. The other time I was in my late 40s in Bolivia, North Carolina, near the Green Swamp. When I was a kid, I loved the woods and I spent time removing leaves so the water would flow better in the stream. When we first moved to the farmhouse, one of them would look into my window when I was trying to sleep. I saw the father, the mother, and the baby in the woods, and my instinct told me not to run. Once, there were hunters after the big male, and as they were moving horizontally, I saw him backing up vertically. I later found the barrel of a rifle that had been broken off, up by the road. There was a picture I saw online of a baby Sasquatch sitting on a log holding some daisies. I believe I took that picture in the 70s and it was taken away from me. Wow, that sounds pretty frickin' crazy. I'm not familiar with that photo, but if it's around, maybe somebody should post it up. In Bolivia, North Carolina, there were reports of a possible escape or release of a big cat around 2009 or so. It made the news and some pit bulls had been attacked. I would hear growling sounds outside my window, but it wasn't a big cat. It was what they call in Florida a swamp ape. My best memory is being a little girl watching the mother, father, and baby sunning themselves on some big granite boulders in our backyard. It is sad that most of the land there has been developed. Back in the 1970s, there was plenty of catfish. And knowing my father and I, we probably fed them even if we were not always aware. My father brought home a big potato peeling machine that looked like a small rocket and said whatever took the potatoes probably was hungry. I feel like seeing them for myself gave me a sense of being blessed, and the instinct to not run saved my life later on. The Sasquatches probably knew we were a little different and not a threat. Wow. Well, that's interesting. That sounds like, I don't know, hold on, there's a second email from you attached below this one. Sasquatches, North Carolina, Margene Morrison. This is Margene. I wrote an email this morning and wanted to add some further info. The farmhouse where my family lived in the 70s was on Abernathy Road, and we could see Mountain Island Lake from our porch. It was built in the 1880s with the corner stone carved from the boulders in the backyard. The owners had the fire department burn the house down a few years ago. The woods where the Sasquatch family lived is supposed to be part of a nature preserve. There are some plants and flowers that only grow in the area, which I believe is across the water from the Lata Plantation. In Bolivia, North Carolina, near Green Swamp, is where I lived 15 years ago. That dirt road bypass way goes all the way back to a hunting club, water treatment plant, and a turkey farm. Miles of dirt roads, off of dirt roads, behind the many yellow-colored gates in the Green Swamp area. Sometimes the gates are open and sometimes they're closed. I remember it was 15 years ago because I have a Beagle Terrier named Dottie, and she is 15, the same age as my grandson, Tony. I used to sing to Dottie and I used to sing to Spotty, the dog I had in Abernathy Road, who looked just like her and lived to be 15. Terrible voice I have, like a southern Minnie Mouse. That might have attracted the Sasquatches. Also, I always leave leftovers to the wildlife, feed the birds, deer, squirrels. One time growing up, we had a refrigerator full of carrots. I'll never forget the look on my husband's face the first time he saw a possum had made a nest under the hood of his car. He was on his way to the invasion of Panama, and he was from the island of Saipan, northern Mariana Islands, USA, where there are no possums. It had babies, and I fed it leftover hot dogs. I'm gonna see my family in Montana this summer and we'll be out hiking, but won't do any of that knocking or howls. I would feel like an idiot or like I was making fun of the Sasquatches. Don't you think they recognize their own calls, can tell when human beings are imitating them? I wouldn't go looking for them because I figured they'd show themselves to me when it was the right time for them to do so. Like I said before, my instinct not to run, and I was as afraid as anyone would be, helped me later in life. There's another time I had not had that same instinct not to run, but this time it was from a human being. And if people want to know what a real monster looks like, it's Edward Wayne Edwards, dead now. And Sasquatches aren't monsters or apes, but kind of like beings of the forest. All right, and there you go. Sent to you from Margene Morrison, Bolivia, North Carolina. Margene, thank you so much for saying it to me. I appreciate it. All right, what do we got? Hi, Steve. I enjoy the encounters you share. I've had more than one encounter. One when I was a teenager visiting my cousin at Lake Cowichan. Very familiar with Lake Cowichan. We bought a Ford Mercury Marauder off this old guy. He told us it ran. My cousin told him he was 16. He told us the engine block was cracked, but still ran, but it would need oil. We paid him like $50 back in 1970. My cousin was only 15 and I was the same age. We went to my uncle's hardware store and bought a case of boat motor oil, threw it in the trunk and took it up behind Lake Cowichan on one of the old logging roads. Well, not 5 minutes in, we lost the muffler. It sounded like a Sherman tank. The old car had a big block V8 and we were trailing a huge cloud of smoke. Not to mention we had to stop every 15 minutes and feed it oil. My cousin knew the logging roads pretty good, and there were quite a few back in that day. In fact, we found an overgrown road where there were some saplings, some as thick as 4 inches. So we took a run at it, and we were plowing down these trees at high speeds. Came to the end of this road, then the engine seized up on us. So we left the beast and started walking back to the main logging road. It was getting late in the day, and when we made it to the main road, and for the first mile marker, which they were mile markers back then, LOL, we were laughing and talked about what a beating that old car took when I noticed the mile marker said 15 miles and the sun had just dropped behind the mountains. It was about 8:30, mid-August or so, and a clear night. I knew by 9 we were not going to see much after 9 p.m. because it was a moonless night. We walked about 5 miles and it was getting close to 9, and it was literally pitch dark, other side of the stars, other than the stars we could see in the canopy. Then we heard some whoops that echoed in the darkness. These were loud, followed by screeches and screams. Nothing we have ever heard before. We thought they may have been a couple of Roosevelt elk. We kept trying to convince each other it was something we were familiar with, until it got so loud it actually hurt our eardrums. We could hear branches breaking under their footsteps just off the road from us, but we had no source of light, and we could barely make each other out. We were walking as fast as you could walk without running. Then we heard them talking. It was the strangest language. I remember it sounded like a First Nations language at times, but the eerie thing I remember was the vocal range was crazy. 1 minute, high-pitched, the next a low, garbled voice, as best I could describe it. They started screaming, and we started running. We could barely see anything, but they were right beside us. We thought they were like demons or something unknown. Then we saw the streetlights down below us, and we ran down the mountain like Olympic marathon runners under pure adrenaline. I knew later after hearing vocalizations that we had been chased out of there by a clan or family of Sasquatch. My uncle just laughed at us at the time, although later in life I have heard them again here in Hope, BC, when I was exploring. Phone crapped out again, or the camera shut off again there. I had a visual encounter during a salmon run on the Fraser and the Coquihalla, if I can share that another time. Oh, and I don't think these creatures were out to hurt us, but to scare us out of the area. I think they're like humans. Many are passive, but there are always a couple mean ones you'll run into. Thanks, Steve. My name is Jim. Jim, that's a hilarious story about you guys being little rednecks with that car out there at Couch. I'm not sure there's too many people that live rural on the island that didn't do this similar shit back in the day, right? But one thing I do know of was back in the day a Missachi Lake turnoff. Or Missachi? Was the turnoff to go to Port Renfrew? Yeah. And there's a man there with his kids, I believe, and they had a boat in tow going to Port Renfrew to go fishing. It wasn't even light out yet, and they stopped to pull over to pee, and something picked up the ass end of the boat and trailer and shook it violently back and forth till it bent the tongue to the point they couldn't get the trailer back off of the truck. He pinned it thinking they were in a landslide till they realized later on they're on flat ground and there is no landslide there. And the Cowichan area, that road, right here where I am, Banfield Road too, everywhere on the island, there's sightings 2 days still. Dozens of them. Dozens and dozens. And I forgot to add in, my neighbor who just talked to, him and his family and his dog also had an experience themselves with some crazy sounds coming out of the woods that scared their dog, which your dogs aren't normally scared of, and that was west of Sprout Lake. And that wasn't too long ago either. So there you go, that's an interesting one. That's nothing, I've been broken down in the middle of nowhere between Heather Campsite and Banfield. I took the back roads. Klanawa, Maine, I got broke down there in the middle of the night. Piss and rain, I had to sleep in my old 73 Ford pickup truck, and I'll tell you what, I had the doors locked and did not a minute went by. I wasn't thinking of what might come up and look in the window. I wasn't too enthused about that. And then some shake block poachers came by about 3 in the morning, and they needed my truck off the bridge, so they gave me a jump started my truck and carried on, and that's how I was able to drive back to Ubo. I got my truck fixed. The mechanic had rewired my new alternator the wrong way, so it drained my battery by the time I got halfway to Banfield, and there I was stuck in the dark. Thankfully nothing happened. But anyway, we gotta take off. I gotta go back out to Banfield, jump in the boat, take group fishing in the morning, and then I'll be back. But I'm not gonna share from the boat anymore. The reflection off the white hull that you can't see in the camera is just too much. It drives you insane. All the UVs bouncing off everything and nailing it from all the different directions while you're trying to focus on that iPhone screen. We keep sending them in. I'm gonna crack open the emails again fairly soon and grab a whole bunch of fresh ones, save them in the appropriate folder that right now I'm really trying to get caught up in the people who sent in a long time ago and got missed so far, all right? But I will get to everyone soon.